deeply meaningful conversation tonight. Well, thank you everyone for joining tonight's webinar on Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery today with special guests Sarah Augustine and Mark McDonald. We're so grateful that all of you have joined us for what should be a powerful set of conversations that'll no doubt stir your hearts and minds toward love, justice, and right relationships with the land and with each other. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Heinrichs. I'm the Director of Indigenous Settler Relations for Mennonite Church Canada, and I'm based here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which, despite its reputation, is actually the most beautiful place in these lands some call Canada. And it's also Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'm lucky tonight to be co-hosting with my good friend, Katarina Friesen, who I'll invite at this time to introduce herself.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you all of us for joining us. It's good to see some familiar faces on the screen and also to meet some folks who are new to me joining tonight. I am a Mennonite pastor and educator, and I'm also an organizer with the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition, which is a coalition based in what's called the United States of Mennonites who are coming together to address this centuries old doctrine of discovery, which we'll be talking about tonight, and to come together and animate people of faith towards action and repair today. I'm based on Yokuts land in Fresno, California, and I invite everyone to share your name and whose land or territories where you live in the chat. And I'll put our Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery website as well in the chat for you to read and learn more if that's new to you. So again, feel free to put your name and the Indigenous lands where you live in the chat. This webinar comes on the heels of Indigenous Peoples Day here in the United States. October 11th, previously called Columbus Day, has valorized Columbus in the past as a hero and celebrated the so-called discovery of these lands that, of course, as we know, were not empty. These lands were already known to hundreds of thousands, actually over a million, upwards of a million Indigenous peoples here on what was known as and is known as Turtle Island. And it's so important that you all are listening in on this conversation tonight between Sarah and Mark about the doctrine of discovery, especially if you're part of a Christian faith community. Because we believe that it is the church's responsibility today to respond and to help undo the doctrine of discovery, because it came about in the name of Christ. And as Sarah Augustine, who will be sharing tonight, has said, what has been done in the name of Christ can be undone in the name of Christ. Jesus, who taught us the way of love of neighbor rather than conquest. And furthermore, we believe it's important to address the doctrine of discovery because Indigenous peoples whose lands so often are not recognized and whose sovereignty is not upheld are on the front lines of climate justice, protecting lands and waters for the sake of everyone, for the sake of all life here on Mother Earth. And they're calling us towards liberation from these nets that we settlers are trapped in. These nets that have trapped us in the way of taking too much of Earth's gifts. And we see these struggles happening from the Line 3 pipeline struggle of Anishinaabe peoples to the Apache stronghold struggle protecting Oak Flat to the Unist'ot'en camp and many other places across Turtle Island as well. So I just want to lift up tonight some of those struggles in our hearts, in our prayers, and hopefully beyond tonight in our actions and solidarity as well. And we'll offer some opportunities to come alongside further in the evening. I also want to lift up Sarah's book. Sarah Augustine has recently published a book through Herald Press called The Land is Not Empty. And I'll put the link in the chat here, which you can order online, where she goes into more detail than what we'll hear tonight on some of her own story and background on the harms of the doctrine of discovery and how the church can be part of addressing it and undoing it today. Also, if you're based in the United States and are part of a Mennonite community or congregation, I invite you to join the Repair Network, which we've recently launched through our coalition, and I'll put in the chat as well, of communities coming together to organize and to support each other and cross-pollinate ways of seeking repair in response to the doctrine of discovery. So I'll turn it back over to Steve before we introduce our speakers.
Awesome. Thank you, Katerina. I really appreciate how you set the context for tonight's conversation, and also have already resourced us with a number of ways to go deeper into this conversation. So I'd like to share right now how our conversation is going to proceed tonight. Katerina and I will engage Sarah and Mark in discussion for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to field questions from you all from this larger Zoom circle for about 30 minutes or so. So if you have questions that you'd like to put before Mark or Sarah, you can just write them down in the chat, and then my friend Katie Zawatsky, our amazing tech person, is going to be bundling up those questions. And then when we go to our Q&A time, Katie will appear on the screen and she's going to field those for us. So and if you want to direct a specific question to Katie, you can screen down on the chat, and you can even isolate it so it doesn't go to the whole group, and Katie can rephrase it if you're not sure how to actually word your question as well. So with that, we're going to turn it back to Katerina, who's going to welcome our guests to introduce themselves.
So Sarah and Mark, we would love for you to actually introduce yourselves rather than Steve and I sharing a very long and extensive list of your roles and accomplishments. If you'll put it into your own words, who you are, what brings you to this work, and if you'd like to share any stories, I know you have worked together in the past and have a longtime friendship. If there are any words or stories about one another, or maybe some jokes that you'd like to share, we're open to that as well.
So who starts here?
Mark, please go first as our elder here.
Wow, that's sweet. Anyway, so my name is Mark McDonald. I am the National Indigenous Anglican Archbishop for the Anglican Church of Canada, and I have been involved in these discussions since I was very little. And my father explained to me basically the antithesis of the doctrine of discovery when I was in grade school. And so this has been something that has been a part of who I am ever since. And I've lived all over Turtle Island and in the Arctic, and I was the Bishop of Alaska for 10 years before I took this position. And in all of the work that I've done since I was a lot younger, this issue has been central, either if not explicitly spoken, it has always been a big part of all of the issues that we deal with. And my work has been since the start of many decades ago, has always been in an Indigenous context, which is exciting to me, and I'm glad to be here. Very glad to be here.
Well, I'm Sarah Augustine, and I have been working around the doctrine of discovery as, responding to the legal doctrine in the United States and internationally since about 2011, when I worked with Robert Miller and Steve Newcomb and John Diefenbacher Krall to write the statement on behalf of the World Council of Churches repudiating the doctrine of discovery. And, you know, I would say that I started working with Indigenous people directly in 2004 in the context of the Guiana Shield, working with Indigenous peoples there, which is in Northern South America, and really was stumped by the issues that they faced in terms of their lands being polluted by resource extraction and not having control of their own lands. And, you know, I was shocked by that. I didn't know how to address it, and learned the words, the doctrine of discovery is the root cause for what was going on there. I myself am a descendant of the Tewa people, but I was raised, you know, in the underclass, in a very disrupted family situation, and really learned about my own story as a displaced person, an internally displaced person, through walking with these Indigenous folks in South America. So I got to know Archbishop McDonald, and I think I met you for the first time in 2011.
Yeah.
We were working together in the World Council of Churches, and Mark, you know, from my point of view, is a deeply gentle and kind and hilarious person, but also a pretty smart cookie. And I was trying to figure out how to get the World Council of Churches to move beyond writing a statement to actually having committed institutional commitment, which to me meant staff and budget. And he was kind of, I don't want to out you here, Mark, but sort of a strategist trying to help figure that out. And then we and others organized coalition across the world of Indigenous people to really call the World Council of Churches into a commitment to Indigenous peoples. And so we embarked on that work pretty solidly, I would say, for 2 years leading up to General Assembly, and then for another 2 years after that, trying to figure out how to establish that. So that's how we got to know each other. But I consider Mark to be one of the great peace warriors of our time.
I did the same of you, Sarah. And the only time my children call me Archbishop is when I do something stupid. So whenever someone calls me that, I think, what did I do wrong? So anyway, so there you go. Anyway, it's a great honor to be with you, Sarah. Great honor. Good.
Thank you both so much for those introductions. It's an honor to have you share with us.
Yeah, and here I thought you two were going to be sharing like some funny stories about each other, but you're lifting up in this group. It's beautiful.
Oh, they'll come out.
They'll come. All right. Well, as you can well imagine, in this Zoom circle, we have folks who have done a fair amount of homework around the doctrine of discovery. They've been working with churches and reflecting on the DOD. But we also have folks here in this circle who are coming to this very fresh. This might be the first conversation that they're having around the doctrine of discovery. So we're wondering if you can share with us, how do you explain the doctrine of discovery to those folks who are new, who have never heard about this? And how do you communicate why you care so much about this and why they should? So Sarah, I'm going to invite you to go first with this one, then we'll turn it over to our elder here.
Yeah, so let's see. I'm just going to give you the boilerplate here. You know, the doctrine of discovery, the way I describe it, is it's a body of law and policy that defines reality for Indigenous peoples today. Often when it's talked about, people talk about it as sort of like, oh, it's this old thing that happened. No, it's a body of law and policy that right now today defines reality for Indigenous peoples. And so it's been carried forward into our faith traditions, and it's been carried forward into our narrative about what's right and wrong, and our culture in North America. And those, this is what I mean by that, the idea of manifest destiny or a God-given call to settle the continent from the East Coast to the West Coast comes out of the doctrine of discovery. American exceptionalism in the United States, this idea that America has the right and the responsibility to lead the world, and has a covenant with God to do that work, as the exceptional recipient of God's blessing to go and nation build around the world. That comes out of the doctrine of discovery. But to me, it's first and foremost a legal doctrine in the United States, established in 1823 by the Supreme Court in this land of the United States. That is to say, we adopted it in the US into national law in 1823, and it was cited as recently as 2005 in a majority opinion, Supreme Court opinion that was penned by Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the court case of the city of Sherrill versus the Oneida Nation, which really limited the sovereignty of the Oneida Nation. So it's settled law, it's the law of the land, and it continues to define reality, not only for Indigenous peoples, but for settler peoples, because it determines who has the right to own and control land.
Thank you. Just say amen to all of that, and say also that I think that the doctrine of discovery describes all of those things, but it also describes a very deep hypnotism in the culture, and in the metastasizing economic systems that are going around the world. So I think that the way it plays out is that Indigenous people who might be admired or revered even, but are seen as a primitive form of largely white life and culture. And so people might say, well, gee, I wish I had their faith and their spirit, so on and so forth. They might go to their sun dances and say, wow, that's really cool, but still think that they're observing something that an artifact of something that was long ago. And so you see over and over again people trying to update Indigenous people and trying to make them contemporary. And I think that this, both in Canada and the United States, when somebody says something is systemic, usually, if you listen carefully, they're saying it's really bad. It's really bad and really gross and really standing out there. And for me, systemic is what is hidden, and what is not, it infects people. It infects Indigenous people. I was in a discussion about Indigenous law, and an Indigenous person said, did we have any law? No, that is to them, Indigenous law is the laws that white people had made up about Indigenous people. And so the very rich tradition of Indigenous law is hidden even from Indigenous people. And so this, I think, this example demonstrates the uncountable ways that the doctrine of discovery infects people's minds and hearts, so that yes, indeed, it is this this very explicit legal situation, but the way it plays out in society is extraordinary. And so when Indigenous lands are destroyed, people might say, oh, that's too bad. It's like we're losing this artifact of long ago. They don't understand the evil of it.
So Mark, I wonder if you'd mind if I would just comment on something you said, about
Sure.
it being sort of insidious. You didn't use that word, but it's just kind of leaks into everything.
Yeah.
And I have an example. When my son was in third grade, which was just a few years ago, his third grade class for their history section read Rush Revere and the Brave Pilgrims. That was their novel that they read together as a class, which is written by Rush Limbaugh. So the introduction to that book made clear, I want to make sure that we have another American century, and third graders need to understand American exceptionalism and what it's based upon. So it was a book talking about, the Pilgrim story from the point of view of the Pilgrims being heroes, and without any sort of, that's pretty much it. And so there were some Native people in it that were defined as savages. And anyway, my son's third grade teacher said, well, it is fiction, but it's real live history. This is just a fun way to tell real live history. So from her point of view, this is the truth that she learned in third grade. Many of us grew up playing what was that game? The Pioneer game in fourth or fifth grade, where you got to go on the wagon train and, think through, what that experience was like without any sort of analysis of what the other end of that experience is. And so I guess I just want to say it is deep in the culture, just exactly the way you've talked about the Oregon Trail. Thank you, Sean. You're right. So it is deeply embedded in the culture and not questioned. It is embedded as truth, that this is the way it is, that the narrative is, there is one narrative.
Yeah. Very good.
No, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing those examples. I'm really appreciating that, because like Mark said, these systems have been hidden and yet define reality in such basic ways. So I wondered, to just kind of continue this vein of thought, if you could share maybe some more examples of what the doctrine of discovery looks like right now, as Sarah said, like this is current. What are some other examples of how this plays out on the ground?
Wow. it's hard to pick up something so much, and I don't know if I interrupted Sarah, but I'll just shoot. I mean, so the land here in North America, the land is devoid of meaning. Its meaning is its use, I would say, abuse by Europeans. So the cultivation and the sophistication of indigenous agriculture, for instance, is erased by the assumption that this is not important. So you can do whatever you want to this place because it has no meaning. It has it's the systems that gave meaning to the Alps or things in Europe don't exist as far as people are concerned. It doesn't have any meaning. I think that it may not be understood this way, but when Christians, and I think a lot of us are from a Christian background, indigenous the culture, philosophy was treated as uniquely demonic. Demonic in a way that no other culture was, so that it was to be erased, and the good guys said, we're going to just erase these people. We're going to make them melt into the that was the, you know, they weren't saying let's just go kill them all. They were saying let's erase them. Let's erase their culture, their ideas, their minds, their languages. Let's just get rid of it. And this was the good guys. These were the ones that are celebrated today. So I think there's so many examples, and so my role is premised on the idea that Indigenous people have not only got a culture and philosophy that is important to the larger Christian body and human body of knowledge and wisdom, but it is also based on the idea that that Indigenous people had a form of Christianity that had to be hidden because you could go to jail for it, and that we want to build on the agency of Indigenous people over the centuries. And so these things just, you know, they don't exist to the church. They don't exist to anthropologists, and you know, things may be celebrated, but the capacity of Indigenous people to develop and to take ideas and shape them in their own way it's not of interest, or it's even worse. So I think there's so many ways in which this happens, and when people encounter an Indigenous, you know, they just assume, you know. So I told somebody once that I was a Beatles fan, and they said, gosh, you listen to the Beatles, you know, so how do you escape the Beatles, you know? But the idea is that Indigenous people are some kind of uniquely weird, primitive group of people off in a corner somewhere trying to get light fire from stones, you know. It's it really is awful. So anyway.
Yeah, so I would just ground a couple of things you said, Mark. I always appreciate hearing what you have to say. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're recording this, Steve and Katerina. I'm definitely, you would notice in the book I wrote, I quote you many times. So here's some new rich material here. One of the examples I want to make just in the economic system in terms of making everything a commodity, that the land in itself has no meaning. Everything is a commodity. It can be processed, bought, and sold for short-term gain with no consequence. It's just seen as things. So we're working in the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition, which is a Mennonite community of faith. We're working now with Cacuxtla, which is a community of Mayan people in Mexico living in the Yucatan Peninsula, and their livelihood, their ability to seek a livelihood, is being eradicated by the use of GMOs in the Yucatan Peninsula. And it's basically large-scale agriculture. And it just so happens that the primary people that are bringing that are Mennonite settlers in Mexico. But anyway, what they are saying is we don't want rights to our aquifer. So they're trying to protect their sacred waters. They're saying we don't want rights to our aquifer. Our aquifer is not a commodity. It's a living being. The water is a living spirit. It's not either we have rights to it or we don't have rights to it. That's just rubbish way to even think about what our water is. Our water is alive, and we are here to protect it. And that is, there is no legal language, including in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to address that. And that is a specific cosmology that, from my point of view, understands reality as it is. And reality as it is in this closed system that we all have to live in together has been completely erased in exactly the way you're talking about, with erasure. And so, see, another way that you know, I think Indigenous people experience erasure, I'm going to use this example from my home state where I live now in Washington State in the United States, what's now the United States. You know, Native American youth graduate from high school they have a 50% graduation rate. So, the idea is, gosh, we have a lot of, maybe Indigenous people don't care about school. A lot of people say, oh, we have to help their families care about school, or, we gotta get them aid, something like that. And the fact is, the education system on the reservation and everywhere where Indigenous people live has one story. And that story is the story of that it does not make any sense at all in the reality that they live in. It makes no sense. It is a story of domination and erasure. And that, so we have a legacy of boarding schools. That's true, but for youth who are in school now, their parents who have this legacy of boarding schools see public education as a mechanism of erasure, because it is a mechanism of erasure, and it does not in any way comply with reality as it is. And so I want to make an example. I'm going to give an example. This is it's not about school. This is kind of about child rearing a little bit. An example from the people that I live among, the Yakima people and the Yakima Reservation here in Central Washington. If you see a child running in a parking lot, someone from the dominant culture would say, that parent better go grab that kid because cars drive in this parking lot. And an Indigenous parent has said to me, cars understand that kids run in parking lots. The adults better be paying attention and not hitting the kid. That is one example of a fundamental difference in worldview. And when everything that you're hearing in the education system and all of the systems is counter to your fundamental understanding of the world, that is an experience of erasure. It's a kind of stress that is impossible to quantify in a reasonable way. So what I'm trying to say is that the doctrine of discovery, in exactly the way you're talking about, Mark, dominates everything, including it dominates the world for people from the dominant culture also, whose systems of life that they're dependent on are also threatened. It's not like it advantages some people to the disadvantage of others. That's true. But the closed system we live in is under threat for us all. It is under threat for us all. And the way that we're thinking through the lens of the doctrine is so devastating and detrimental. And there are voices who are saying, stop. And those voices are Indigenous voices. And I want to say that because there are people who are just rejecting it and saying, no, this is not reality. And I call, these systems, the forces of death, extractive, short-term, no consideration for the impact it's going to have on future generations, no consideration for the impact that our ancestors have had on where we are and located in time now. So I would say that's all part of the doctrine. And then I'm also going to say, in Suriname and French Guiana, where I've worked now for 17 years and friends there, you have Indigenous peoples living on mining concessions. This is their traditional territories, and their bodies are contaminated with mine waste because they're living in an area that is completely contaminated because their national government has the right legally to concess their land to mining companies, and those mining companies pollute at will, and it impacts the bodies of Indigenous peoples. They're also forcibly removed, militarized. That's happening not just in Suriname and French Guiana, that's happening the world around, the Philippines, in Indonesia. It's happening in South America, Central America, the Pacific. It's happening in Europe. I mean, this is the ability for Indigenous peoples to be dislocated for short-term gain, for a liquidation industry, for resource extraction that will get profit for maybe 40 years and will destroy the environment there, wherever that is, forever, until the rock cycle takes that land and puts it back into the center of the earth. In deep time, that land will be impacted. That is the doctrine of discovery, and it's happening right now. And it's not just happening to Indigenous peoples, it's happening to everybody. That's happening to everybody. Okay, well, I got on a roll there. So please go on.
Good roll, good roll, good roll.
Yeah, so appreciate that, Sarah and Mark. Like often when I think about the doctrine of discovery, I probably drill down too much into conversations around radical title and the claims that the state has like jurisdiction over land. But you're saying it's all flowing from this worldview rooted in supremacy and erasure of Indigenous knowledges, well-being, and laws and traditions as well. You can't just isolate the specific conversation around land and title. That's really helpful for me. Now, for my community, I'm thinking back in 2000, I think it was 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada put out these 94 calls to action where they summoned the church to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. So not only these legal doctrines, but this religious worldview, this framework. I'm curious to hear from you. We have a lot of people coming from faith communities in this space. What are there good stories of how the church has responded to not only the TRC's call, but Indigenous peoples have been calling for a repudiation of the doctrine of discovery for a long, long time? What are the stories that you're hearing about how churches are responding? Mark, do you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. I mean, although it has gone a lot better than I thought it would, it is very much a mixed bag, because I think that, initially I was involved with the presentation of a number of resolutions to national church bodies and the World Council of Churches. And almost always the resolutions would identify certain things that we wanted governments to know. And and I just, in our case as Anglicans, we wanted the Queen to say she was sorry, and I, that would have been, you can just imagine the headlines. Anyway, so I think the Queen should say she's sorry, but the problem is that the churches were looking at it as if it was somebody else, as if it was a government issue, and so they repudiated the doctrine of discovery, and they were telling the government early on, you guys have got to clean up your act. But they were not examining their own internal life and the ways in which those ideas have shaped theology and ethics and how they've related to Indigenous people, like the residential schools in the US and Canada. All of these things. So what's happening is that people are going through what I would call a gradual process of conversion, so that they might come to and say, yeah, that's a horrible idea, that this doctrine of discovery. And then over time, they begin to understand the ways in which this has infected churches and the way that they've responded to life around them. And it certainly the most, to me, the most difficult and painful aspect of that is what happened to Indigenous people, the genocidal impact of that on Indigenous people. But there's all sorts of ways that this has impacted people. I grew up in a very beautiful community, and when I was a kid, you couldn't. We were right on Lake Superior, and you couldn't eat a meal looking at the lake. There were only a couple places to do it. Now everybody sells that, you know. I mean, because the land is converting young people, not fast enough, I would say, but it's so people looked at the land as an enemy. They looked at it as something to be conquered, and all of these things are part of this infection. But I was getting back to the churches, and I'm sorry to wander a little bit, but I think that the churches have never understood the power and the wonder of what it would mean to express the living word of God in indigenous culture, and what this would add to the world and the universe, what this would do to change the minds and hearts of Christians everywhere. There are a few people, I mean, Laudato Si that the Pope put out, I mean, he's edging towards that, but so it's had a big impact in many, many, many ways, but we have a real long way to go. And that's what I live and pray for.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, I kind of have two minds about this. I live in expectancy for the kingdom of God. I live at my best, hopefully, acting out the kingdom of God, and at the same time holding the hope for the kingdom of God, because we know it's a broken world. So I'm being sort of diplomatic. I'm tired of all the statements. Thanks for the statements, churches. I'm ready to move on from there.
Yeah.
It's hollow. It's meaningless I mean, it's not meaningless. It's a step. It's not a bad step. But, you know, one of the things that really changed my perspective in working together with Mark, when we worked together with Indigenous peoples and built community with Indigenous peoples all over the world, on nearly every continent. And you see the same story over and over and over again, the same devastation. I'm not talking historically, I'm talking today in real time, that in West Papua, the birth rate for Indigenous peoples has been flat for 40 years because the number of people who are killed in extrajudicial executions by the state of Indigenous peoples for living and for agitating for their rights. And that's across the world. That's all over the place. In the Philippines, in certainly in South America, where it's a very dangerous place to be an Indigenous person. We had a colleague from Peru whose travel privilege was pulled while she was working with us because of her, she wasn't, you know, doing anything violent. She was just going around talking about the plight of her people. Church statements feel really lame in that context. Just want to say that. It's like, you know, if we have the opportunity to take some moral authority, I would like to see that. I would like to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a call I have to the institutional church. And then at the same time, you know, the church is the body of Christ. And it's not just the institutional church. We have built together, you know, it started out 4 women together, imagining a national coalition in the US to dismantle the doctrine of discovery. That was 7 years ago. And now we have a national coalition that's working alongside Indigenous peoples and really working on advocating for and living with and calling church institutions to something else. In a strange turn of events, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, here I go. In a strange turn of events, Mark, I was nominated and elected to be on our mission board. What do you think about that? I had my first meeting today. I think that's so funny. Oh my gosh. I wonder if anybody on there read my book. So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is I want to just latch onto something you said too, Mark, which is thinking about the good news through a different lens. You know, when I started working with the Matawai people in Suriname, they were teaching me about Winti, which was considered by the Christian missionaries there to be witchcraft. Winti, understanding their relationship with the spirits, which is their ancestors who were buried in the ground where they lived. And if they were going to solve a dispute between two people, often the clans would get together to solve it. And they would bring the Winti into it, understanding that whatever the dispute is now is rooted in time to what happened before. And is that not good news? That's good news to me. I think, wow, okay. I mean, that really exploded my thinking. It's like, wow, it's not just about me here and now. There's a story here. If I want to live in health, I have to be thinking about what came before and see myself in the context of a family of life, this ecosystem of life and spirit. And that is characterized as witchcraft. So I guess, speaking to your point, Mark, what good news do these traditions have to offer Christians? And that's what I want to know in terms of mission. What good news do Indigenous peoples in their spiritualities have to bring to Christians? And what good news do Christians have to bring to decision makers in extractive industry? I would like to see us establishing missionaries that go to the US Treasury and Congress and to mining companies and to oil exploration companies. I think we could send families out to do that work, and they could be committed. We could send them and they could live there and raise their families, being in relationship with people who are choosing to destroy the world in systems, and working on that slow conversion that you're talking about, Mark. Yeah. So
to build off of where you're going, Sarah, I love this, and that you're on the mission board, raising these ideas of what mission might look like. I'm curious to hear from you as well, Mark, what your vision of the church in mission looks like in light of the harms that we've heard of missionization and Christianity, and what your call would be to the church.
Well, I have a friend who's a theologian, and he was teaching a theology class, and he had them read Luke chapter 10, verses 1 through 12. And he throughout the for roughly 10 weeks, they talked about this passage, and he wanted them to describe what they were understanding and seeing. And all of them assumed, and I mean, they were progressive Christians, so they said, we want to build an inclusive church and everybody feels welcome, and so on and so forth. And after 10 weeks, he pointed out to them that that Jesus was asking for them to become vulnerable, that it wasn't a matter of Christians showing hospitality to others. It was that Jesus was asking them to throw themselves upon the hospitality of others and to put themselves in a situation of intense vulnerability and to trust, to be naked but for the gospel, and to trust that you would find people of goodwill, and that you would find and that to me has been the defining image of what a mission is, and that is to place yourself at the mercy of the other, and this, I mean, it's very hard. Christians are so used to being an institution of Christendom that they find it, you know, and I've Mennonites even. Sorry to say that, but anyway, so that we have adapted, particularly in Turtle Island. The churches have adapted to a different kind of Christendom, but what Jesus is saying is so radically, it is the antithesis of what mission has meant. And what's interesting about it is that, you know, in its most simple form, he says, when you go to them, say God is near to you, and turn around and believe the good news. It's these people are to unveil the presence of God, not bring the presence of God. And so it is, you know, imagine what it would have been like here if that had been the approach. And to this day, we treat the things outside of the church as a terra nullius, you know, an empty land. So our teenagers are an empty land. Anyone who's not a member of the church is an empty land. Someone who isn't Christian is an empty land, you know. And we feel like they have to come in and be a part of us in order to have meaning and worth. This is the way, I think, the doctrine of discovery and a lot of other things, of course, infect the way the church sees things. So I would say that has captured my mind, and I think what we are seeing is a huge shift in spirituality, and that the European spirituality, which was a building and a book and a guy in front, is now being exploded by the clan-centered spirituality of openness to the other. I think we are in a different universe, and many of us are acting out of the old universe. I look forward to when we start doing what Jesus would do. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. Sarah, did you want to add any more? It looked like you were ready to jump in.
Yeah. So what I appreciate about what you say, Mark, to me, and what you say is that if you think about it, it's going to hang around a long time and stick with you and start to do its work in your mind and heart. Yeah. I'm going to talk about some examples from my point of view. You know, as a Mennonite, you know, I'm a convert. I was converted. And so sometimes I think converts are the ones that are the most legalistic in a way. I was taught about right relationship and this understanding in Anabaptism of balancing power, that right relationship was seeking power balanced.
Yeah.
And I think that balancing power when you are the entity in power requires ceding power. So I think sometimes the way this is operationalized is that good people want to go out and help other people balance power instead of ceding power.
Mm-hmm.
And something I think is really important specifically is giving land back.
Mm-hmm.
So many people in my tradition have the opportunity to give land back. And that is a fundamental way of balancing power and acknowledging the spirit of life, which is to say that life is in the land itself, that it's not a commodity to be bought and sold, that it has value in spirit itself, and to return it to its first people who understood that. And I think that is a pretty, maybe a radical idea, and something I think is necessary, but I also think the idea, or the just imagining or trying to imagine giving up power as an act, as opposed to fixing something. I think that is something I long for in the church, giving up power, ceding power. And so, yeah, and I think there are so many different applications and ways that can happen. Yeah. And I think another thing that I would say that is probably tedious, but here I go anyway, is to say that we have such a longing for security as humans in our, especially in individualist dominant culture. And I think the way we justify that in my tradition is through thinking about, well, we're thrifty and wise and we're good stewards and so on, when in fact, we're doing a lot of things to insulate ourselves, when Jesus was really clear that there is no security. He wasn't talking about that. Be wise, make sure you have enough for your kids to go to college. I don't remember hearing that. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that many of us are invested financially in systems of death, and we justify that in all kinds of ways. And that is a stumbling block, or it's a barrier, impediment to giving up power. And the inability or unwillingness to give up power is a detriment to the institutional church and to individuals. So I'll stop there.
That's really good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I see a lot of heads nodding in the Zoom screen and affirmations in the chat for these insights that you're offering up. I'm curious. I was going to ask a question about kind of like, what are the steps that people can take, on, intro level 101 DoD dismantling, and then, 404 or something. But maybe I'll ask it like this. Is there a story from your experience about a non-Indigenous individual or a congregation that you think, they've pressed into this in a good way, that kind of is a hopeful example? There's a few that I know you have some good stories there. So I'll just ask you, maybe for one that's not at the stage of like maybe full on land back, or maybe you want to go there. You go where you want with this one. Sarah or Mark, you take it away.
Well, I think to me, I've seen a lot of people who have found these ideas to be a point of a deep conversion, and to be to really come to understand the scripture and the gospels in a much deeper way. And I think so I have seen this happen to people over and over again. It is I think at times a painful process, but ultimately a joyful one, because it challenges so many of the basic assumptions of economic well-being and that sort of thing. And so what I when I ask elders about this, they always say, well, walk with us. And that is the path of conversion. and that to not only to advocate, but to enter into that life. I often say, Indigenous people plan spaces where different people can be encountered. The powwows are based really on a vision that a woman had of the way in which people would be healed across cultural and racial lines. And these things are available to people. And so I think that, you begin in a kind of political engagement, but you you should understand that without that a deeper conversion, and I'm not speaking here of conversion to Christianity, but that deeper conversion to the life of the good life on this land, you really haven't gone on from the basics. And I think that which is not to say that the basics aren't important. I mean, if you are going off and talking to some indigenous guru, you still need to advocate for what is right. And without that, that's nothing. But I think these messages, these ideas, strike the heart of the principalities and powers that are making life so miserable for this planet and for so many people in it. And I think that people will find the joy of freedom. And I've seen many people in the Anglican Church. It's like taking off all sorts of chains, and I think that joy should also be a part of it. Don't want to minimize the structural political advocacy, but I think in order to be effective at that, you need to find the joy of a converted heart.
And so Mark said this to me, 15 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, and I'm hearing it in a different way. After beating my head against working for structural change all these years, Mark. You are right. So, I want to talk about this Mennonite church I know of in Tucson as an example. And I'll tell you who the pastors are there. That's Carol Rose and Tina Slaybach. And they started out just by wondering what repair would be like. And they had a congregational conversation and tried to figure out, we want to join with Indigenous peoples in repair. And they worked it out. They did what we do, Mennonites do. They formed committees, they talked about it, and they co-discerned, and all the things that are important and work really well, and in terms of inviting the Spirit into discernment. And what has happened with them is that they have joined together with the Stronghold Apache, as the Stronghold Apache are trying to preserve their sacred waters in the face of the strongest empire on earth, ceding or concessing their land to a foreign copper mining company, and so, I'm not going to say like it's just one and done. They're part of that process. They're on the road together. And that's been a joy to get to witness and to be a part of. Carol is part of our coalition, and we get to be a part of that. Our whole coalition is brought together to support her good work and the work of the Apache there, who are at, you know, who are struggling for their sacred water and land. So, I mean, that's one example. And, you know, again, I don't think there is a three-step plan. You know, I believe so strongly, I believe so completely in the spirit of life, the great animator, the great unknown, and that force's ability to animate us and be with us, and to speak with us and through us collectively as we work together, collectively as we discern together and we figure out how to be a people together. I believe in that. I believe in that. I know that to be true. And, you know, and Mark, you know, in listening to your words, you know, that work is accomplished in relationship with the spirit of life. Yeah. So I will say, you know, when the Mosquito people reached out to me right after we went together, Mark, I don't know if I even told you the story. You and I asked you if you'd go with me. I went to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and I filed a petition on behalf of the Wayana people of Suriname, and I asked you, hey, will you go with me as a co-petitioner? And you did, you went with me. It was super nerve-wracking and scary. We flew to DC and we sat in front of the people, you know, it's a Human Rights Commission. And I told my story and so on. And shortly after that, the Mosquito people reached out to me and said, hey, will you help us? I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, I'm not a pastor or a church worker, you know, like I'm just an ordinary person. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any special skills. And I really felt so burdened by this request, and I didn't really know how to respond to it. It's like, oh my gosh, a whole new geography and different language. I don't know how to do that. And you know what ended up happening is we worked together with Mennonites across the country to bring human rights language into some national legislation. We went to the US Treasury and said, hey, you know, we really think that if you're going to give financial support, that you need to not give financial support to people who are violating the rights of Indigenous people. And that language was put into that legislation. And I want to say the reason that language was put into that legislation is because of Mennonite ladies from across the United States who got on airplanes and went to meet with their senators who were on the committee working on that. And I'm so thankful for that. So that's not, you know, it's not like this huge accomplishment. That legislation passed in 2018, but it is just amazing what ordinary people can do when they work together, animated by the Spirit. And I feel really, really proud of that, because many of the people, you know, who participated in that campaign were not, you know, they didn't have foreign, you know, intelligence experience, or, you know, they weren't attorneys. They were ordinary people who just said, yeah, I don't think that these Indigenous people in Nicaragua should be removed from their land because they've done nothing to deserve that. So, you know, I appreciate that. And I don't, you know, I guess what I would say, because we did that pretty quickly, is that I don't know how to do that. That was a great animator animating people to move that way, you know. And I gave a talk, I don't know how many years ago, several years ago in California, and a lady who heard the talk there was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be delegate in the Democratic Party, you know, I'm going to the convention and I'm a delegate. I could write a thing asking for there to be a plank in the Democratic Party's, you know, platform that we should dismantle the doctrine of discovery. So what do you know, a year later, we had it. It was done. I didn't think of that. I didn't do that. You know, some person did it, and then she reached out to me and said, how do I do this? I was like, I don't know anything about that. We got some people together and people showed up, and, you know, and it was awesome. And, you know, I'm not trying to say, oh yeah, here's this 3-step plan. at all. I guess I'm just trying to give examples of the conversion that you're talking about, Mark. That willingness to be open to this vulnerability, to imagine things that don't yet exist.
Yeah.
Because the systems that we're dealing with now are not created to comply with reality, actually. So we have to imagine what reality really is. And we're all just inculcated, or we've been, we're just shot through with a vision that is not a real vision.
Yeah.
So I have to say, it has to be the spirit that animates us towards something else.
Thank you, Sarah and Mark. Yeah. Yeah, may that spirit do her work amongst us this evening and continue that work of conversion among us as we continue to hold these stories together. At this time, I'd like to invite my colleague Katie to join the spotlighted circle here and to offer up some of the questions that have been shared in the chat from the wider Zoom circle. Katie?
Hi, everyone. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you so much, Mark and Sarah, for sharing so far. So I would say that there's like 2 or 3 themes that are emerging in the chat with the questions that people are posing. A lot of them have to do with action. What do we do? And you've touched on that quite a bit already with what you've shared with us so far. And then the next theme that I've kind of pulled is something that we all need, hope and evidence of change. So I think I'll maybe start there. Can you both maybe touch on any evidence of, the momentum for change that you've seen in your work, and how do we keep a momentum of change going, even if it's not as fast as we like? I'll just start there.
Well, so let me just say this. I have a strong sense of how far we have to go, but I would also say I never expected us to get here. I figured that I would spend the last part of my ministry just trying to communicate some basic ideas, and I noticed when I started that they would say, Mark McDonald is going to speak on Indigenous issues, and they would give me a room, and it would be me and the AV guy, and I would say, where is everybody? Would go, and go back to reading his book. And that was pretty much the way it was. I was like that commercial for those of us who are older, the loneliest guy in town. So I was, and all of a sudden things changed. And I don't think I had anything to do with it. I think that people began to sense hope, because the one thing that everybody has known for decades is that it's impossible, it's miserable, it's horrible, it's terrible, and I think that people in the midst of the difficulties began to see hope. And so I encounter so many people. I mean, I encounter still the same miserable stuff that has always been there, but I encounter so many people who are changed, and I am surprised. I am absolutely surprised that things have gone as quickly as they have, which is not to say, things are we've reached a good place. We're far from it, but boy, we were talking, just a few decades ago, people saying, we got to get rid of these people. And, they were going to do it kindly, but, so we have made some major things. We have a long, long way to go, but I see this wherever. Now, I'll say one thing. I was at the first Truth and Reconciliation event in Winnipeg a long time ago, I suppose more than 10 years ago. And I was there, and Chief Bobby Josephs, I was just sitting there kind of spacing out, and he came up to me and he said, we're going to make it. And what he was saying is that the way I read it and the way I felt it, and I had a similar experience. I was privileged to speak to Elijah Harper. They were, I think what they were talking about is that once you unleash truth, it begins to change things, and that it is a force that makes it. And I think the truth that has been revealed is unstoppable. It can be slowed. People will try to slow it, but it's going to continue on. And so I'm very hopeful in the power of truth.
Yeah, so I also feel hopeful, and when Mark, whatever you say, Mark, I just listen to it and I say, yeah, that's it. That's absolutely it. He's been at this a long time, folks. I often feel like, hey, I'm a newcomer to all this. I've been struggling alongside Indigenous people since 2004. And every day I wake up with hope. I often go to sleep exhausted and frustrated and I'm ready to quit. How many times has Mark heard me say, Mark, I'm quitting. This is it. I'm hanging it up. I'm done. I did my job. I've come this far. This is it. And this is what Mark said to me one time. Am I allowed to say this, Mark? He said to me, what are you going to do, Sarah? Are you going to sell insurance? Is that what you're going to do? Is that what's in your future?
You would be good at it, actually.
I don't know
I'd
about
buy
that.
some from you. I don't have any, but I'd buy some from you. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, and the scripture that comes to me is, return, O Lord, how long will it be? Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love. And I claim that scripture because I am satisfied in the morning. I am satisfied in the morning with the steadfast love of the Spirit. I am, and I know that, and that is my hope. And I don't want to be too like oofy foofy either. I also believe deeply that in spite of our hopelessness, we move on. That we do not act justly because we feel hopeful. We act justly because it's our mandate to seek justice, regardless of how we feel in any moment. I may feel hopeful in the morning. I may feel despair in the evening. And it's still my mandate to seek justice. Why? That was the mandate that Jesus brought to us, to seek justice and conciliation. And that's what I am going to do until the day I die, because that is what's laid upon me to do. And I find hope, regardless of whether I feel it or not, in the faces I see here on Zoom. I find hope in these others who are also coming forward and feel that mantle. I don't know, is mantle the wrong? I mean, it might be the wrong metaphor. I'm not theologically trained, I say again. Who also feel that animation of the Spirit, of the great animator. And I say, I am not alone. And this is the blessing of my tradition, as an Anabaptist. I am not alone. I am with others. We are discerning together. As we're gathered, we experience that Spirit. And I have hope knowing that when I die, these structures that we face now will likely still be in place. It's not my job to dismantle them single-handedly. And I can't feel despair if I don't, in my arrogance, dismantle them single-handedly. It is my job to carry on seeking justice, regardless of the outcome. Seeking relationship, regardless of the outcome. That is my job, and that is my mandate. That is the mandate that I know is upon me. And I don't mean it to sound like an accusation, but it's also upon you. Regardless of whether it feels good or uncomfortable. That is our mandate. And Jesus was really clear that it wasn't going to be easy or comfortable, or, that we were all going to get there together in one pack. It was clear that it was going to be difficult and challenging, and still we would be satisfied in the morning with the steadfast love of the Spirit. And that's what gives me hope, that realization. And I'll tell you, in year one, it was like, this is crazy. I'm totally deranged. In year 10, I told Mark, 10 years, I've been at this 10 years. I had a dream that was the first dream. I told Mark all about it. Then 10 years later, I had another dream. I was like, Mark, all done. I had the other dream. He was like, oh my gosh, you're so full of crap. You're just, you're just getting started. I'm kidding. He wouldn't say crap. I'm ribbing you, Mark. But he was like, there's no way you're done. You're on it. You're doing it. Here we are. I don't know how many years ago that was. At least 8 years ago, I think. Yeah, here we are. So, and I say that, and then I also have to say that one thing that has given me nourishment and hope throughout my life is Mark.
Likewise, Sarah. Likewise. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you both for answering that question. I think we have a few moments here just for maybe one more question. Does that check out Steve and Katerina? Okay, great. There have been so many wonderful suggestions for how church folks can get involved, step into action. You've mentioned Land Back and different movements that are taking place, but sometimes I find in these conversations, it's hard for people to imagine that first step when it is so new and you're taking it all in and you're learning so much at the very beginning. If you're at the very beginning of this journey. So I guess I would just pose to you, what do you recommend for folks who feel compelled to do something because of what they've learned, but just feel stuck or like they don't know what to do? Maybe we'll start there. Mark, we can start with you, and then that'll be it. I'll hand it back to Steve and Katerina.
So I'll start anyway. So I think someone, an Indigenous person, once asked me, where are Indigenous people in the Bible? And I said the Book of Revelations, chapter 12, and this sees the epic battle of the ages between the personification of evil, which later, of course, is revealed to be involved with the economic systems that are working against a woman and a child in the wilderness. And I think that today the epic struggle is manifesting itself I have to say, the Book of Revelations is very real in indigenous communities. It makes a lot of sense there, and I would say the first step is to understand how urgent it is, and I think that many people feel it is an adjunct. So something. When we take care of everything else, it would be a good thing to throw them a little bit of something too. I think today, estimated 1/4 of the land that is usable is in the hands of indigenous people and their protocols. Today, estimated 80% of the biodiversity is in the hands of indigenous people and their protocols. There is no livable future for this planet in which the rights of indigenous people are not respected. And so this is the epic struggle. It's not the totality of the epic struggle, but it speaks to so many of the things. And so when John says, I, John, share with you in the tribulation, the kingdom, and the patience. Those three things are where we have to begin to understand that we are sharing in tribulation, we are sharing in suffering, but we're also sharing in kingdom and joy. And then to be patient in our endurance and pursuit of God's rule and reign. I think that if you take the lens that you have received in this, just read the paper tomorrow morning, or the screen, I guess. Sorry, but begin to work. There is really nothing more urgent for you in this place, because so much of the issues of mining, pipelines, all of those things, the law that will define the next 100 years is being experienced and written in all of these things. So I would get involved right away, and I would go to a powwow if I were you, and check it out. Yeah. Those two things. Yeah.
And so I'll answer that briefly, and that is to say, we are, at least many of us here, are Mennonite people, and I want to urge you to approach your collective and to urge them to take the first step, which is, in my mind, as Mennonites, to form a committee. Or join one of our committees. We already have a coalition. Yeah. We're anxious for you to be part of it, and by that, to carry out what Mark has said. Let us do it together.
Amen. And I want to say, I want to come out here. I'm a closet Anabaptist. So anyway, I wanted to. I guess that makes me an amphibious Christian. So anyway, thank you very much. And somebody said, how do you find a powwow? Just find somebody who has a computer and say, a powwow is near me, and then you'll get a bunch. So more than you want. Anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark and Sarah, for blessing us with your hearts, your stories, your wisdom tonight. We are so honored, and we've received so much. So we lift our hands to you in this Zoom circle, just with hearts full of gratitude for your wisdom and your presence. We also want to thank everyone who's joined us on tonight's call for engaging this critical conversation, one that does require courage and vulnerability. So thank you for your willingness to show up, to work at these relationships, and to find ways to link arms with others in the struggle, even if it means joining a committee. In the days ahead, you're going to receive an email from Katie with a link to the recording of this webinar if you want to stew over the gifts that have been offered up, as well as recommended resources for further learning and action. I'm going to now pass the mic over to Katerina, who's going to bless us with a departing word from Sarah's book.
Yes, thank you both, Mark and Sarah, for your words this evening. And Sarah doesn't know this, but I wanted to take a last opportunity to promote your book, The Land is Not Empty, Following Jesus and Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery. We've all got copies. Nice, Mark, which just came out. And if you've enjoyed hearing from Mark and Sarah, Sarah's sharing, there are so many rich chapters and quotes in this book, but I just want to lift up this last quote from the end of the book as kind of a final blessing from Sarah through her final chapter. She writes, "The God revealed in Scripture through the Hebrew prophets, through Jesus, is a God who is struggling with us and within us to bring about God's shalom. Our work is not easy, but it is profoundly necessary. The survival of life on earth depends on our ability to see past the reality designed to diminish us and justify the systems of death. The bonds essential to this reality cage us all with the logic of greed, selfishness, and determinism, the logic of death. We must find the courage to seek, create, and invent a reality consistent with the logic of life. Do not live in fear. Do not live in fear. Walk in certainty, in the nobility of a mighty spirit, which you share with all creation." May it be so.